Imagine walking through the streets of Pompeii, where the echo of footsteps mingles with the whispers of history. Among walls covered in ancient paintings and graffiti, one name stands out, engraved with the passion of those who witnessed unforgettable feats: Tetráites. This was not just a name, but the symbol of a man who transcended time, becoming a legend whose echoes resonate to this day. It was no coincidence that his fame spanned centuries, surviving the ashes of Vesuvius and the oblivion of time. Tetráites became one of Pompeii's most famous gladiators, and his story is not only in books, but engraved on the city's very walls. In graffiti, found in amphitheaters and taverns, his name appears accompanied by words that extol his bravery. Imagine the impact these inscriptions had on those who lived at that time. They were the equivalent of the celebrity posters we see today, but with a personal, almost visceral touch. These records were not limited to Pompeii. Artifacts bearing references to Tetráites have been found as far afield as France, England, and even Hungary, proving that his fame traveled as far as the roads of the vast Roman Empire could take him. But who was Tetráites before he became famous? Little is known about his origins, and this only adds to the fascination. He could have been a prisoner of war, a slave, or an ordinary man forced into the arena. What matters is that when he stepped into the amphitheater, he left behind any previous identity. From the moment he took up his sword, Tetráites was not just a man. He was a living spectacle, a force of nature shaped by sweat and blood and cheered by the roar of the crowds. Imagine the scene, the Pompeian sun reflecting off the polished metal of his helmet, the deep beat of drums announcing the start of combat, and thousands of eyes fixed on his every move. Every step he took, every blow he struck, was not just a fight for survival, but a performance that captivated and mesmerized the audience. And it was in one of these fights that Tetráites immortalized his name by defeating prudes, a victory that would become legendary, echoing not only in archaeological records, but also in the popular imagination of the time. This connection between Tetráites and the audience is what makes his story so fascinating. It was not just about who he defeated, but how he did it. A gladiator's charisma and presence could be as important as his skill with the sword. Tetráites was not just a fighter, he was an embodiment of human courage and endurance, a hero who inspired both those who watched him from the stands and those who heard his story in distant lands. Now, imagine yourself among the crowd in that amphitheater, feeling the adrenaline rise with each blow exchanged in the arena. What would you feel if you saw Tetráites in action? Let your imagination wander through this scene and share what you think it would have been like to experience that historic moment. Your vision is an important part of keeping the legend of this immortal gladiator alive. Imagine the arena boiling under the scorching Pompeii sun. The intense heat ripples through the air, creating illusions above the golden sand that covers the blood-stained ground. Dust rises with each firm step, mixing with the rhythmic sound of the drums and the enthusiastic shouts of the crowd. The smell of sweat, iron, and expectation hangs in the air as thousands of eyes fix on the epicenter of the spectacle. At the center of this grandiose scene stands Tetráites, a warrior whose presence commands respect and fear. His body, sculpted by battle, gleams with the mixture of oil and dust, highlighting each muscle tense in anticipation of combat. But what really set him apart from other gladiators? The secret lay in his combat style, the mirmillo, an art that combined technique, strength, and an impressive dose of audacity. His training was arduous and relentless, forging him to face death as naturally as others breathed. For him, each fight was a dance between life and the abyss, and his mastery of combat transformed each duel into a lethal masterpiece. The mirmillo was not just a fighting style, it was a statement of intent. Gladiators of this type wore a crested helmet that not only protected but also commanded respect. made of gleaming bronze. The helmet covered almost the entire face, leaving visible only the watchful eyes. Two dark and piercing slits that seemed to see beyond the mere physical. This detail created an aura of mystery, making Tetráites almost inhuman in the eyes of the audience, a predator ready to attack. His arsenal included a gladius, a short, sharp sword perfect for quick, precise attacks. The blade's edge was meticulously polished, capable of cutting through flesh and tendons with frightening ease. The shield, a sturdy rectangular scutum, served both defense and offense, being used to push opponents, unbalance them, and create openings for fatal blows. Metal guards covered his arms and legs, offering safety without compromising mobility. However, what drew the most attention was his bold decision to fight without a breastplate. This choice was not common among gladiators, as it considerably increased the risk of fatal injuries. For Tetráites, however, it was a testament to extreme courage and absolute confidence in his abilities. He wanted his opponents to see his bare skin, his taut muscles, his relentless determination. He did not fear pain. He embraced it as part of the spectacle. Tetráites' technique went beyond brute force. He dominated the arena with calculated movements, using his own body weight to gain an advantage in hand-to-hand combat. His attacks were quick and precise, almost as if he were dancing between life and death. Every step, every turn of his shield, every swing of his sword was part of a lethal choreography that mesmerized the spectators. When he advanced, there was no hesitation, only the precise calculation of his next move. He was a contained storm, waiting for the right moment to explode with irresistible fury. Interestingly, the Myrmil was often pitted against the Thracian, a gladiator armed with a small round shield and a curved sword called a sica. This contrast created spectacular duels, where the Myrmil's endurance was tested against the Thracian's agility. In the case of Tetráites, his ability to quickly adapt to the enemy's strategies was what made him virtually unbeatable. He fought not only with his body, but also with his mind, anticipating moves and creating tactical traps in the middle of combat. He observed every little detail, his opponent's breathing, the tension in his muscles, the position of his feet. Nothing escaped his astute eyes. To understand the impact of his style, imagine being in a packed grandstand, feeling your heart race with every blow exchanged in the arena. You can hear the sound of metal against metal, the roar of the crowd cheering with each precise movement of Tetráites. The sun reflects off the blades, creating blinding flashes. The smell of fresh blood permeates the air. The ground trembles with the energy of the ecstatic crowd. Now think, what would your reaction be if you saw a gladiator defying danger with such confidence and skill? The arena of Pompeii may have disappeared into the ashes of time, but the legend of Tetráites continues to echo. His name is still remembered, his spirit still lives on in the memories of those who recognize the greatness of courage. Leave a comment, sharing what would impress you most in a fight like this. Your opinion helps keep alive the memory of Tetráites, the gladiator who transformed the arena into his stage and combat into an art form. The arena was full of life, with the sound of the crowds reverberating like an untamed roar. The heat was unbearable, and the sand beneath the gladiator's feet became almost as slippery as the blood that covered the ground. There, amidst the expectant looks and the cheers of encouragement, Tetráites knew that this moment would be the turning point in his journey. He was not just facing another adversary, he was preparing to forge his legend, a firm step towards building a personal empire that would surpass Rome itself. Prudes, his opponent, was an experienced gladiator, renowned for his brute strength and impressive skills. With the size and ferocity of a bull, he seemed unbeatable to most combatants. But unlike the other gladiators who feared him, Tetráites remained calm, his gaze fixed on his opponent as he prepared for the most important fight of his life. The rules of the fight were simple, but cruel. The arena was unforgiving. Victory was not just a sign of skill, but a statement of survival. Many gladiators entered the arena hoping to win glory, but few had what it took to truly excel. Tetráites, however, possessed something that transcended mere physical strength. He had a presence that mesmerized the crowd and an indomitable spirit that challenged even the most extreme limits of human endurance. When the clash began, what followed was a dance of iron and flesh. Prudes advanced with all his might, trying to deliver crushing blows, but Tetráites was faster, more agile. He moved like a shadow, dodging with precision, becoming an almost supernatural figure in the eyes of the audience. The crowd was in a frenzy, cheering with each dodge, each blow deftly blocked. With each exchange of attacks, the difference between the two gladiators became clearer. Prudes, with his immense strength, tried to crush Tetráites' defense, but his adversary seemed to anticipate every move. It was as if he knew, somehow, what Prudes would do before the gladiator could even react. Tetráites was not only fighting for his survival, he was dancing with death, defying it with almost suicidal courage. And then, the final blow. At the height of the fight, with Prudes tired and vulnerable, Tetráites took advantage of a flaw in his defense. With a quick movement, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, he delivered a well-aimed blow that made Prudes fall, defeated and bleeding on the sand. The crowd went wild, the shouts of victory and acclaim mixed with the sound of metal touching flesh, creating a terrifying symphony of triumph and death. But it was not only the victory that made that moment historic, it was the way in which Tetráites earned the respect of everyone present. He did not kill his opponent brutally or needlessly. He defeated him with honor and mastery, a warrior who not only had control over his sword, but also over his morals. He did not seek to humiliate or destroy, but rather to demonstrate his superiority in a fair fight, where skill was more important than brute force. With Prudes' defeat, Tetráites came to be considered not only a formidable gladiator, but a true hero. His image began to be immortalized in art, from marble statues to paintings on the walls of Pompeii's houses and temples. But more than that, he became a symbol of courage and resilience to all who saw him. To the inhabitants of Pompeii, he was not just a gladiator. He represented the fight for freedom and human dignity in a world where these things were often out of reach. As his fame grew, so did the number of his followers and admirers. He was no longer just the warrior of the arena. He became an icon. His exploits were talked about in taverns, markets, and even in political circles. Stories of his victories and heroic deeds spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the Roman Empire. His victory over Prudes was the starting point for his rise to prominence, but what would make him eternal was not just his strength, but the fact that he embodied something greater than himself. At that moment, Tetráites was no longer just an ordinary gladiator. He had become a symbol of Rome itself. His story was passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. He was the kind of man who, when he won, made the public believe that victory was possible, not only in combat, but in life. His courage, his skill, and his honor were the fuel that fueled his legend. But like all stories of greatness, what comes next? What happens to a hero when he reaches the top and finds himself surrounded by glory? How does he deal with the weight of fame and the expectations of everyone who now looks to him as a role model? Now imagine being in his shoes. You, who were just an ordinary man, are now the hero of Pompeii. Your image is part of popular culture. How would you deal with the pressure? How would you maintain your dignity, your focus, your true essence? These are questions that Tetráites certainly asked himself, and that many gladiators who followed him also asked themselves. But what comes after such a great victory? The next step is even more fascinating and revealing of the true journey of a gladiator. Have you ever felt pressured to maintain an image or carry the weight of something greater than yourself? Leave your opinion in the comments, because your perspective is also part of this story. Tetráites' victory was not just a personal achievement. It resounded throughout the Roman Empire like thunder, reverberating across borders from distant cities and villages. His fame went beyond the walls of the Pompeii arena and reached places he probably never imagined. Tetráites' name was no longer just spoken by the city's inhabitants, but became part of the empire's daily life, like a living legend whose deeds were told with admiration and respect. In those days, the Roman Empire was vast, with borders stretching from North Africa to the British Isles. Despite the difficulties of communication and transportation, the stories of an extraordinary man like Tetráites were passed on by word of mouth, and each new story only increased the grandeur of his image. Merchants, soldiers, politicians, and even peasants in the most remote regions began to hear about his victory over prudes and his meteoric rise in the arenas. Imagine the scene. A traveling merchant crossing the dirt tracks that connected the regions of the empire stops in a small town in the hills of Gaul. In a tavern, he tells of the last fight of the Pompeian gladiator, Tetráites. The villagers, who had never seen a combat arena, are fascinated by the story of a man who dared to challenge a giant like prudes. For them, Tetráites was not just a gladiator. He represented the strength of the human spirit, an example of overcoming adversity. This type of story was repeated thousands of times, and so the name of Tetráites spread, gaining strength with each telling. In the military camps, the name of Tetráites also became a symbol of bravery. For the Roman legionaries, always waiting for the next battle, stories of victorious gladiators like him served as inspiration. Life in the Roman army was not easy. Soldiers endured long periods of marching, fighting, and rationing. Stories of victorious gladiators were a way to escape the harsh reality, to nurture the hope that, like Tetráites, they too could achieve glory, fame, and, who knows, freedom. And so, the name of Tetráites was not just a name, but a constant source of motivation and energy for the men who marched across the empire. At the same time, in Rome, the capital of the empire, the name of Tetráites began to be mentioned in higher circles. Poets and philosophers discussed his bravery. Artists drew inspiration from him to create sculptures that captured the essence of his victory. Even politicians began to use Tetráites' name in their election campaigns to evoke the spirit of courage and leadership. The gladiator who had defeated prudes had become more than just a figure of entertainment. He was now a cultural icon, a living representation of Roman power and the human capacity to triumph against the odds. But what was it that really made Tetráites' name travel from one corner of the empire to the other? What made his name a symbol in every sphere of Roman society? The answer lies in the combination of several factors: his unique skill in the arena, the way he embodied the idea of honor and courage, and the way his story was told and retold through the generations. Tetráites was not just a gladiator who had won a difficult fight. He was a man who represented the values of a vast empire whose victories went beyond his own personal battles. The cultural impact of Tetráites was so profound that he began to be represented in many forms of art. In Pompeii, his victories began to be depicted in murals found in homes and taverns, making him a local hero, someone with whom everyone was proud to identify. It was not uncommon to see children imitating his movements, trying to copy his fighting styles in small street games, a reflection of the importance of the gladiator in everyday life. And in Rome, the imperial capital, the cult of his image grew. Tetráites became a common theme in philosophical discussions about courage and honor. Roman philosophy, with its emphasis on virtue and morality, found in Tetráites a perfect example of the Roman ideal of perseverance and bravery. He was not just a spectacle in the arenas, but a symbol of what it meant to be true, honorable, and dignified in the Roman Empire. Even more impressive was the fact that Tetráites' name was not confined to urban centers. He was present in remote locations, in soldiers' camps, and in the most remote villages, where tales of him were passed down from generation to generation. Each story that crossed the borders of the empire increased the mystique of his name, making him a living legend that people felt they had to tell, as if it connected them to something greater than everyday life. Tetráites' name thus became a force that spanned not only continents, but also time. And this journey of fame and recognition did not end with the gladiator's death. On the contrary, his legend has persisted through the generations, preserved in the chronicles of Roman historians and immortalized in monuments and artifacts that have survived the test of time. Today, Tetráites is remembered not only as a gladiator, but as a symbol of human strength and the ability to resist and win. Now think for a moment. What would it be like to see your name echoing around the world? How would you react to knowing that what you did, something so powerful, would cross borders and become an eternal legacy? Tetráites managed, with his courage and skill, not only to be remembered, but to become an icon. And now, the big question is, what happens when a man achieves immortality through his fame? What goes on in the mind of someone who sees himself not only as a victor, but as part of something much greater than himself? That is what we will see in the next chapter. But first, I want to know, do you think a hero like Tetráites is capable of maintaining his humanity when he sees himself as so great? Leave your comment below and share your ideas. In ancient Rome, the life of a gladiator was in many ways a dance with death. Each fight could be his last. Each victory could be his only chance at freedom. For victorious gladiators, there was a remote possibility of winning the long-awaited roods, the wooden sword that symbolized their freedom. But this achievement was neither simple nor guaranteed. It was a rare reward, a promise that was offered only to the most skilled gladiators with the most accumulated victories. The journey to conquer freedom was arduous and full of challenges, and Tetráites, despite his growing fame, knew that the real fight was not only inside the arena. Throughout his career, Tetráites had defeated countless opponents, and his popularity grew not only among the masses, but also among the organizers of the fights, known as lanistae. These men who controlled the gladiators were essentially the masters of their lives, deciding when they fought and, in many cases, what kind of combat they engaged in. For Tetráites, being considered a free gladiator in the arena was a milestone, but he knew that true freedom, the kind that meant living without the constant fear of a violent death, would only be achieved after an endless series of victories. The Roods was not just a sword. It represented the end of a journey of suffering, the reward for years of battle and bloodshed. Every gladiator knew that to earn this symbol of freedom, he would have to endure countless trials. Tetráites' journey, however, was different. His fame was not limited to the battlefield. He had become a mythical figure, a living legend whose victories inspired even his own sponsors. Each victory in the arena brought him closer to his goal, but he also knew that the weight of expectation could be his greatest enemy. The pressure on him grew with each fight. The crowds that had once cheered him enthusiastically now saw in Tetráites not only a victorious gladiator, but a symbol of resistance and overcoming. He was no longer just a man fighting for his life, but the protagonist of a story that transcended his own existence. This made him even more vulnerable, since the defeat of such a revered hero would mean not only his personal downfall, but the collapse of an entire narrative built with blood and sweat. Tetráites therefore knew that each combat was more than a simple fight. It was a battle for immortality, a struggle to keep his essence intact, even in the face of the imminent loss of his humanity. Freedom did not come easily to gladiators, and the chances of achieving it were slim. Tetráites knew this, but he also knew that the best gladiators, those who stood out for their skill and courage, could one day be awarded the title of champion. Each victory brought him one step closer to that freedom, but he was aware that winning alone was not enough. He also had to maintain control over his own story. To be more than just a fighter, he had to become a legend. But what would happen if he finally won his freedom? What would it mean for someone like Tetráites, who had lived his entire life in combat, in constant danger of death, when he finally had the right to live as a free man? Freedom represented the end of an era for him, but also the beginning of a new phase, one in which he would no longer be shaped by the expectations of others, but by his own desires and choices. This was a dilemma that many gladiators faced: how to define themselves after freedom. Was it possible to live a peaceful life away from the arena, or was fighting deeply ingrained in his being? As appealing as the prospect of freedom was, Tetráites knew that it did not just mean rest. It also represented the loss of an identity that he had built over the years. Many gladiators who conquered the rough had a hard time adapting to life outside the arena. The fame they had built as gladiators often became a burden, a constant reminder of a past of violence and death. For Tetráites, this was something he too would have to face. His name, his legacy, were things he could never abandon. In addition, there was the question of the relationships he had built throughout his career. Many gladiators, upon gaining their freedom, were faced with loneliness. The bond with fellow fighters, with those who had endured so much adversity together, was often stronger than any relationship with the outside world. Tetráites' freedom would not only mean a new life for him, it would also bring new emotional and psychological challenges. Was he ready for this? For Tetráites, the path to freedom was a two-way street, a journey of conquests and victories, but also of sacrifices and losses. Each fight, each combat, was a chance to get closer to his goal, but also an opportunity to reflect on what he was leaving behind. Freedom would not be a simple reward. It would be a radical transformation in his life, a change as profound as the battles he fought in the arena. And upon achieving freedom, Tetráites would have to make decisions about what to do with it. Many gladiators who retired from their lives of combat found new paths, but others, like the feared Spartacus, tried to rekindle the flame of revolt, taking their fights outside the arena and becoming leaders of insurgent armies. Tetráites' life could have taken many different paths, but he knew that his story would be remembered forever, no matter which direction he chose to take. So what would Tetráites do with his freedom? Would he accept peace, or would he continue fighting in a different way against new enemies? Which would be stronger, the man he would become outside the arena, or the icon he was inside it? And you, have you ever wondered how you would react if you had the power to change your own history? Freedom comes at a price, and the real choice is knowing how to use it. What do you think Tetráites would do? Leave your opinion in the comments below. Your vision is part of this journey. And so ends the story of Tetráites, the gladiator who conquered the arena, fame, and who knows, even freedom itself. But like every great story, this one doesn't end here. Remember, Tetráites' journey is far from being the last, and many other gladiators and heroes are waiting to be told. Now, here's a warning for you. If you thought Tetráites' story was incredible, you better keep an eye out, because we have more stories like this one that will surprise you and take you to places you never imagined. Did you know that just like Tetráites, other gladiators were also fighting for something more than just survival, and that they did things that changed the history of Rome forever? So, if you want to know more, just stick around and follow us to discover the next chapters of this incredible journey. And of course, if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment, because your opinion is super important and makes all the difference. Now tell me, what do you think Tetráites would do if he were freed? Would he live in peace or continue his fight? I'm curious to know your opinion. See you in the next video. And until then, keep getting inspired by these epic stories.